rotation back in the way that they envisioned. But that assumes nobody else gets hurt in the meantime. That assumes that, these guys don't have setbacks in their own recoveries, which even with some of these situations we've seen. And then in the bullpen, Michael Kopech is getting close to returning. He's finishing up a rehab assignment. Blake Trinan and Kirby Yates are going through throwing progressions right now, so they'll probably be back at some point in the not-too-distant future. The only real concerning one is Evan Phillips. When he first went down with this forearm thing, the Dodgers were very declarative. We only think he's going to be 15 days. This one we think is just a precautionary move. And now we're 3 weeks past that point, and he hasn't really gotten back to starting anything throwing-wise yet. And Dave Roberts acknowledged it's a little concerning. So, I think on the whole, the good news is they haven't had any season-ending injuries. They're still pretty confident that most, if not all, these guys will be back with time to kind of get back into rhythms later this season. But again, until that actually happens, there's always other things that could pop up and other ways things can go wrong. And given what the Dodgers have been through the last couple of years, I don't think they're ever banking on some of these health situations to go perfectly.
Yeah, of the many names you mentioned there that are currently on the Dodgers MASH unit or part of them, Roki Sasaki, like you said, getting closer to throwing a baseball again, picking up a baseball. From our understanding, his return might not be as linear as, hey, pick up baseball, get healthy, throw to hitters, return to the rotation. Maybe a little bit of a detour, kind of getting more acclimated to Major League Baseball and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, we spoke with Mark Pryor about it a little bit. Alana, you could probably add more words that be more better than I'm saying with it. But Jack, in your kind of opinion, what can you tell us or what you know about it? Roki's path back to the starting rotation. Are they going to kind of maybe put him through a little bit of a boot camp before he's back?
Yeah, I think what they're going to use this time for is to try to get his delivery in a place where he's executing his stuff in the way the Dodgers thought he would. He was going through a shoulder thing, yes, but even from kind of early in the season, the command was nowhere near, I think, what the Dodgers were expecting it to look like. That was a problem even going back to spring training. Obviously, the huge fluctuations in his velocity were really problematic, especially given that the way he throws his fastball, if it's not in the upper 90s or the 100-mile-an-hour range, it's a relatively easy pitch to hit. The splitter, is a really good pitch. He just wasn't able to kind of put himself in situations to be able to use it effectively, to set it up very well. And I think, for the Dodgers right now, this can almost be seen for Roki Sasaki as like a second start to the season where, okay, let's see if we can get his mechanics to be a little more consistent, so his command can be a little more consistent, so his velocity, isn't fluctuating as much as we've seen. And how quickly that happens is going to depend on just kind of how things look as he starts to build up, as he starts to progress. And yeah, that's why, for him, like you said, it's not exactly as linear as it might be for some other guys, because as the Dodgers said, and as Roki Sasaki said when he first went on the IL, this is also an opportunity for him to try to fix some of the things in his throw that were plaguing him just beyond the shoulder thing he was going through. So it's probably something that, in a best case scenario, he's a month or so away from getting back. But if they have to stretch it out a little bit more so that he can continue to try to find a little bit more consistency in his performance, I don't think they're going to be afraid to do that. Especially if they get some other guys back to help with the depth. So they still look at him as a long-term play. They're very confident about how his development will go. I don't think they're quite surprised that there are some of these bumps, just considering it is a 23-year-old pitcher who hadn't thrown a lot in Japan. But for this season, there's a lot he's going to have to improve on to be a guy that the Dodgers can count on come the playoffs, and that's why they're going to take their time right now to try to get him closer to that version before they send him back out in big league action ability at this stage.
Shifting gears from pitching, because surprisingly, the Dodgers also have offense, they have defense, they have other players on the field. And one of the guys entering the season, if we're talking about the 2-month assessment and experiments and all this, we got to talk Mookie Betts at shortstop. Of course, he just penned a column, I think today, that dropped about Mookie and his transition to shortstop. Despite the complaints from people on Twitter, he's actually been pretty good at the position. And as you wrote in the call him. It seems like they're in no hurry. The team is in no hurry to kind of pull the ripcord like they did last year. So one, I want to get your thoughts on Mookie as a shortstop, and two, is there sort of a feeling that the transition is maybe bleeding into the offensive numbers at the moment?
Yeah, so to start with the defense, I think it's beyond what anybody would have been expecting out of him this year, even given the fact that he got the whole winter to kind of work on some fundamentals, hone in his technique. You know, they were expecting him to be better. But when you look right now at kind of how he grades out compared to a lot of other shortstops around baseball, he's been one of the better defensive shortstops legitimately in the league this year. That's not to say that there still haven't been mistakes. It's not to say there still haven't been, growing pains and learning moments. You saw the flip play in New York this week. You saw the ball in Cleveland the other day that he couldn't get down before he came back and got the double play. So there's still a lot for him to learn and grow at that position. Kind of the bet the Dodgers are making right now is fundamentally he is sound enough that he's not going to be a problem defensively when we get to the postseason, especially considering if he's this good after 2 months into the year. Just imagine how much more progress he can make over the next 4. The bet is that you look at that flip play in New York the other day. That's the kind of play that Mookie Betts had never really experienced before, even in practice, because it's just such an abnormal, atypical kind of thing to try to do that until you actually experience it for the first time and fail, that's the only way you're going to learn how to do it. And the bet is that as he experiences more of those kinds of things, he's going to get better. The next time he gets a play like that, he's going to know what to do. Even this week in Cleveland, after that game, he was working on flip throws with Chris Woodward in his pregame work. I think they're very confident that just the baseline of his defense has gotten to the point that they can trust it over the long term this year, and that with more time, he can, kind of get to being more of a premier glove potentially at the position, which is kind of crazy to think about, when you look back to just kind of where he was last season. Now with the bat, it is a question. Obviously, his numbers have been way down. The quality of contact has been way down. Some of this, he believes, stems back to the stomach virus he had at the start of the season, the fact that he developed some bad habits trying to regain bat speed when he was coming back from that. He's already a guy who, with his swing, just given his stature and his lack of, kind of physical tools, strength-wise, his swing has to be perfectly lined up for him to be the kind of hitter he has been for most of his career. It's one of the things Dodger coaches are most impressed by when it comes to Mookie Betts, is how consistently he can kind of get his swing where it needs to be. The fact that he hasn't been able to do that yet, yes, has raised some questions about, is the focus on shortstop distracting him too much from that? I think an interesting quote with Freddie Freeman said, it probably is a little bit for him. We see how much he works at the shortstop position. Obviously it's going to make it a little bit harder for him to be the kind of offensive player he wants to be. But, in Freeman's view, it's once he gets the shortstop thing down, his bat's going to come around. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the place the Dodgers are at right now. They're okay. They can overcome the lack of production from his bat to this point, as long as it's, there's been progress with the shortstop play defensively. And that in time, they still trust that, hey, this is still Mookie Betts. He's eventually going to get it going again. And if we get closer to the end of the season and his bat still isn't there, and we need to take another look maybe at pivoting out of this shortstop experiment, they're not going to be afraid to do that. And I think Mookie Betts will be open to that if he feels like, his shortstop play is really harming his offense. I just don't think we're there yet. I think the sample size is still a little bit too small. And I think big picture, the way the Dodgers built this team, the best version of it is probably with Mookie Betts at shortstop, if he's playing shortstop really well and he's contributing with the bat. And I think they still think that end goal is realistic enough, and that Mookie Betts' progress defensively has been real enough that they're willing to kind of let this play out over the course of the whole season, hoping and confident that by the time they get to the playoffs, they're going to have an impact bat at the top of the lineup and somebody they can trust to play good shortstop defensively.
And let's remember that if Mookie Betts wasn't willing to come into the infield and play shortstop, they would not have been able to re-sign Teoscar Hernandez, who everybody was clamoring to make sure that they did re-sign. Before we let you go, Jack, looking ahead to this weekend series, I'm excited about it, right? It's a matchup of the World Series of last year, 2024. What do you think we can learn from this series upcoming, perhaps for another potential matchup in October? And this is very much a different Yankees team coming in. They're playing really well right now.
Yeah, I think, learning, it's tough to kind of extrapolate anything the Dodgers are doing right now, especially when you look at, like the pitching lineup they're going to have this weekend is far different than it might look for a potential World Series rematch. What I'm kind of curious to see is just at a kind of an interesting point of the season for the Dodgers where they've just been kind of treading water for a little while. Can they tap into, I think especially with the lineup, which has been somewhat up and down in recent weeks, can they tap into something in what will be a very high-profile series? Obviously in a World Series rematch, like this one is going to feel a little different than your average late May, early June weekend 3-game set. And I'm curious to see, at a time that they could really use a big series win, a momentum-building kind of performance, if they can just kind of raise their level of play against what's going to be a really talented Yankees pitching staff. I don't think that if they lose the series, it's going to be time to be hitting, the panic button or anything like that. I think obviously the Yankees are going to have some extra motivation coming into this, not just because they lost last October, but because of obviously some of the comments that Dodger players made about their lack of fundamentals in that series and all those sorts of different things. So there are some rich subplots here. It's going to be a really interesting atmosphere, I'm sure, these next 3 nights at Dodger Stadium. But yeah, I just, we've seen so many times this veteran Dodger lineup is kind of able to turn it on when they need to at various points. And it does feel like this weekend would be a really good time for them to do that, to kind of maybe jumpstart something here in the middle of this really tough stretch. So that's the thing I'm going to kind of be watching closest is, can they stress somebody like Max Fried? Can they get to this Yankee bullpen, and can they kind of build a weekend at the plate that'll